Ще пуснеш ли? Здравейте, колеги! Предлагам да започваме. 3 часа е. Добре дошли на днешния семинар. Първо искам да потвърдим дали се чуваме. Някой онлайн? Няма как да разберем. Да. Добре дошли на днешния семинар. Той е посветен на изключително актуална и чувствителна тема в областта на киберсигурността. Трябва ли плащането на откуп в случай на Ransomware атака да бъде забранено? Наш лектор днес е главен асистент, доктор инженер Веселин Бончев. Той е водещ изследовател в Националната лаборатория по компютърна вирусология и нейн основател. Той има дълбока и дългогодишен опит в анализа на вредителски програми и киберзаплахи. По време на презентацията ще бъдат разгледани изключително актуални теми, които, трябва да бъда честна, ще бъдат повдигнати въпроси, в които моралната дилема се сблъсква с прагматизма. Така че с тези мисли давам думата на Веселин Бончев.
Thank you. Okay, for our remote viewers, my name is Veselin Bonchev. I'm assistant professor working for the National Laboratory of Computer Virology at the Institute of Mathematics and Informatics, Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. Well, that was quite a mouthful, wasn't it? Any of our remote viewers who know me only from my social network profiles are probably thinking right now, who the heck is this guy? What can I say? The photo that I use in my profiles was taken quarter of a century ago, and with time, what do you know, things change. That's why I'm thinking of changing my profile picture. To something like this. Although I probably will not, because I'm not yet 900 years old, not quite. Anyway, if you don't know me from my social network profiles, I used to post a lot as Vest on Security on Twitter, or as it is currently known, X, which was an amazing stupid thing. But I stopped posting there because the current user interface is awful and unusable. I'm talking about the desktop user interface. I don't use smartphones, so I don't know how the mobile app looks like. I'm also Bonchev at infosec.exchange on Mastodon, and I post mostly there these days. I also have an account on Blue Sky, vesonsecurity.bsky.social, but Blue Sky is mostly for left-wing politics and shit posting, and I don't do left-wing politics, so I post mostly snide comments there. Anyway, as I said, this lecture is being recorded, so I don't really know who the people who are going to watch it are. I mean, all the people here currently in the audience know perfectly well what ransomware is, but nevertheless, I'll have to explain at least the basics. I hope you'll not get too bored. I will try to make a joke or two along the way. By definition, malware is malicious software that encrypts the data on the victim machine and demands a ransom for its decryption. Ransom payments are usually demanded in cryptocurrency, most often Bitcoin, although there are some peculiar cases. For instance, in one case, a French company was ransomware, and the attackers demanded the ransom to be paid in baguettes, not those long French breads. But usually it's Bitcoin. Very often, confidential data on the machine is stolen and exfiltrated before the encryption, and then a secondary ransom is demanded not to publish this data because the data is confidential for the company would not like it to have it published. And currently, in about 50% of the cases, data is exfiltrated, so quite often. The whole thing started in 1989 with the American, the anthropologist, Dr. Joseph Pope, who distributed floppy disks purporting to contain a program that evaluates your risks to get infected with AIDS. It was called AIDS Information Database. But what it did eventually was to encode really, the directory structure of your disk. So your files became inaccessible. The files were there, but you saw garbage in the directories. And it demanded a certain amount of money to be sent via bank wire to his company in Panama. Of course, bank wires are trivial to trace, so it was immediately obvious who was behind this scheme. Because it was not real encryption, just encoding, antivirus researchers wrote a program that reversed the encoding, so we were able to restore access to the disk. Nevertheless, he was obviously guilty of a particular kind of crime, and when he tried to enter the United Kingdom, he was arrested there. However, while he was in jail, he started acting very peculiar, or to use some unprofessional word, crazy. He put socks on his head, started talking about being abducted by aliens and so on. And eventually, the judge decided that he's not mentally fit to stand trial, and he was returned back to the USA just with a case. But after that, there were a few cases where the ransom was demanded in gift cards, in electronic currency, gold, cash, things like that, ego. But the ransomware problem really started exploding with the invention of Bitcoin and then other cryptocurrencies. Nowadays, ransom payments, at least those that we know about, and we don't know about large part of them, about more than 2% of all the transactions in Bitcoin are ransom payments. And you might be thinking, okay, 2% is not much. But Bitcoin is used extensively for speculation. Nobody really plays anything in Bitcoin, but they use it to speculate on the price of Bitcoin in actual money on the various cryptocurrency exchanges. And the transaction value is of the order of 200 to 600 million US dollars per day. And about 2% of that, several millions, maybe a dozen millions, is ransom payments. It's supposed to be before yes. And we have had, of course, state-sponsored ransomware like WannaCry, NotPetya, and so on. I was particularly careful here to use the term state-sponsored, not state-created. I know that the accepted narrative is that WannaCry was made by the military of North Korea and NotPetya was made by the intelligence services of Russia. I disagree with this opinion. I know what you're thinking, but come on, the United States sanctioned one military guy in North Korea because of his involvement with WannaCry, and they said that the Russian intelligence services, I think FSB, were responsible for the creation of NotPetya and so on. I'm not denying this, and I agree with it. I'm saying that while the military of North Korea was involved, and the intelligence services of Russia were responsible, they didn't make this ransomware. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I have seen other works of theirs, and they are much more professional. These ransomwares were shitty pieces of ransomware. They didn't work properly. What I think actually happened was some North Korean kid living and working or studying in China was told by the North Korean government, you have to make that amount of money for the path, no matter how, do whatever you want. He had the bright idea to make a ransom war, a war that spreads from one computer to another and encrypts the computers that it has infected. He used a very efficient spreading mechanism, which was based on a vulnerability discovered by NSA and stolen by somebody else, most likely Russian intelligence, and released to them. So it was a very good war, but it was totally shitty ransomware. The demand for ransom was supposed to be sent via email, and the email addresses, of course, were immediately nuked by the email provider, so nobody could really contact the author of the ransomware to get the decryptor. And so, by the way, WannaCry is still around. In one of our honeypots, you can see visualizations there on the screens on the wall. One of the protocols that we monitor is the protocol used by WannaCry to spread. And occasionally we still see WannaCry examples. Those are not the original variants of WannaCry. The original variant doesn't replicate anymore because it checks for the existence of a particular website, or as we call it, the kill switch. And if it exists, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't spread, doesn't replicate, doesn't encrypt, nothing. However, there are variants where this check has been disabled, so it still spreads. But during its spread, the encryption part of it has been corrupted, so it cannot encrypt. So it spreads, nobody notices it. It's still around, just does not. Regarding NotPetya, what I suppose happened there, Russian intelligence is well known to work in cooperation with cyber criminals. And I suspect that they gave them the tools and access to a particular Ukrainian company from where the explosion of infection started, and gave them the general direction, codes travel to Ukraine, no matter how. And then some break-the cyber criminal made NotPetya, which basically was made by taking an existing ransomware Petya and patching it a bit to use different encryption keys, different public key pair keys, and so on. Some say that it was a wiper because after it encrypted the master file table of NTFS, it destroyed the encryption key. So it was not possible to decrypt it, even if you paid the ransom. This is a valid theory. However, it could do this only if it had administrator access to the computer. If it did not, it infected the files, and it did not destroy the encryption with that. So it was theoretically possible to decrypt them if you had to decrypt. Anyway, ransomware enters the computer with several main vectors. You would notice that at the top, the yellow line. Is there a way to turn off the touch screen?
No.
Too bad. At the top is unknown. We don't know how it enters. The reason why this is so is because ransomware, the deployment of ransomware, is usually the last step. It is quite obvious when your files get encrypted, but at the time when you see this, the attackers can be in your computer for days, maybe for weeks. They have all the time in the world to ruffle through your data, to exfiltrate the data, and to wipe their cases. So you just don't know how they enter the machine. Very often, not always, but very often. The next most used entry vector is remote desktop compromise. Take this advice from me. If you are responsible for the maintenance of company's network, never, ever expose remote desktop directly to the internet. I don't know where you can see the screens at the bottom, but the lower left screen is a honeypot of ours, which shows the attacks against the remote desktop. It simulates a remote desktop machine open to the internet. And you can see that in 24 hours, it has been attacked almost 800 times. So if you have a machine with not very good password, or with a password that has been leaked in the past, exposed to the internet, it's going to be discovered, it's going to be invaded, it's going to be ransomware. So don't do that. If you have to have remote access to your computer via remote desktop, either limit the number of IP addresses to those from which you're going to be connected to it, or if you have Active Directory, put it behind a secure gate. Yes,
Nie ma substancje, trzeba czasem sobie knows that everything is okay by our side. Please confirm.
We have technical problem? Tell me when it should continue.
We continue.
Okay. So if you have Active Directory in your company, put the remote desktop access behind secure gateway and preferably implement multi-factor authentication. Otherwise, you will be cross-spun. The next most used entry vector is email, phishing, malware sent via email, and so on. And in very rare cases, it is some disgruntled employee at the company deploying the ransomware locally. There are a few such cases. This is rare. Ransomware causes huge amount of damage. According to some statistics, in 2023, 2/3 of all organizations that had cyber security incidents were hit by ransom. Basically, if you're a company and the CSO tells you, oops, we had a cybersecurity incident, you can say, aha, we have been ransomware. Average downtime can be 24 days, but I must emphasize again, this is average. Some companies have taken months to recover, some companies have never recovered at all. The largest ransom ever paid was $90 million US. It was paid by a linked set of petroleum companies. Well, these guys had the money anyway. The average recovery cost was almost $2 million US. This includes not just the ransom, this includes the cost of downtime, the cost of salaries to the people who are doing the recovery, and so on. And again, this is average. There have been attacks on hospitals, pipelines, and other critical infrastructure. And this is just a quotation from an article. In 2021, ransom demands have been between $5 and $11 million US for organizations of the critical infrastructure, and around $131,000 US for hospitals. The next chart shows the amount of ransoms paid to the ransomware groups. And again, I must emphasize, those are the ransoms that we know about. Many companies try to keep silent about it and silently pay the ransom. And even if they disclose that they have had a ransomware incident, they usually don't say whether they have paid the ransom or not. But even the small part that we know about, just in 2023, the ransoms paid were $1.1 billion. You know, $1 million here, $1 million there, and that is over of real money. The damage of the ransomware is much larger, of course. In 2024, the damage was $42 billion. Again, this includes everything: downtime, missed sales, salaries of people who are doing the recovery, payment of the ransom, everything. 42 billion of damage per year. And judging by the shape of the trend, this year it will be even more. Projections say that by 2031, total cost, annual costs will be more than $250 billion, and there will be one attack every 2 seconds. Many of the victims pay, although generally you can see in the chart there is a declining trend of payment. In case you cannot read the small numbers, first quarter of 2019, 85% of the victims paid. Last quarter of 2023, only, I didn't touch it, only 29% of the victims pay. And despite this downtrend, you saw there is an uptrend in the amount of ransom pay, which means larger and larger ransoms are being demanded. You wouldn't be surprised to learn that with such large amounts of money, now organized cybercrime has been involved. In fact, the ransomware groups are organized like diversified businesses. There are groups of people who are software developers. They do nothing more than write the programs that do the encryption. That's right, and do the encryption. And this is not a trivial task, because cryptography is involved, and it is very easy to make a mistake when you're implementing an encryption algorithm. In the early years, this was to our advantage. Very often, the ransomware had cryptographic vulnerabilities, and we could use them to decrypt the files for free. Unfortunately, eventually the bad guys learned, and now they implement cryptography correctly. So there is nothing we can do. The next group is the so-called initial access brokers. Those people understand nothing about software development. All they do is scan the internet, the whole internet, looking for vulnerable machines. They try the latest published vulnerabilities. They try default passwords and so on. The internet is a constant background noise and attacks. Our honeypots show this very well. Once they find vulnerable computer, they don't do anything about it. They don't ransomware. Just put it on a list. They compile huge lists of vulnerable machines on the internet. These lists are then sold to the third group, the so-called affiliates. They buy a list of, say, 1,000 entries for maybe a couple of $100, and they go through the list and deploy a ransomware to all these vulnerable computers. And the ransomware is so designed that if a ransom is paid, a percentage of it automatically goes to the software developer. They can develop the ransomware. This way, everybody gets paid. Software developers get paid automatically percentage of the ransom. Initial access brokers get paid when they sell the lists of vulnerable machines, and affiliates get paid by the larger percent of the paid ransom. And as you saw, we're talking about more than $1 billion annually. So large ransomware groups essentially have income comparable to the military budgets of small countries. And they certainly can afford to buy zero-day exploits. Those sell for different amounts of money. The most expensive ones are for mobile phones, but they're not restricted yet. They can sell for $1 or $2 million per exploit. But there are other exploits for different applications used in personal computers, which are much cheaper. And those guys are perfectly capable of buying them and exploiting them. Okay, you saw now that crime is organized. Unfortunately, the police, not so much. Basically, the police departments usually lack expertise. And talking about my Bulgarian audience, if you have a small company, and your company gets ransomware, what are you going to do? Go to the police? You'll be kicked out because they'll think that you're making fun of them. And in a sense, you will be. Okay, in Bulgaria, we have a special law enforcement unit called GDBO, which specializes in organized crime. However, they are interested in things like drugs trafficking, drug trade, human trafficking, and so on. They don't really care that your two big companies' computers got encrypted. There is another organization, Bulgarian organization, called DANS, the State Agency for National Security. This is something like a combination of FBI and NSA for our American viewers. They would be interested if you told them that the Russians are attacking our nuclear power plant. But if you tell them that your two big computers got encrypted, they wouldn't be terribly interested. And even if they are, there is nothing they can do because even they cannot break the encryption. According to a report I have seen from the FBI, they say that there are averagely 250 Chinese hackers per one FBI agent who does cybercrime. Of course, not all those 250 Chinese hackers do ransomware, but some of them do, and those are just the Chinese ones. In addition, we have the Russian ones, the Ukrainian ones, the North Korean ones, and everybody else. So even the FBI is overpowered, let alone small police organizations. And the funny thing is, police departments are often ransomware themselves. I'm going to show you a few examples. Swansea Police Department pays ransom. 5 police and sheriff departments hit with ransomware. Arkansas police pay ransom to hackers. Police pay off ransomware operators again, so they will hit first time in the past. Melrose police pay on Bitcoin. There are many examples, these are just a few. Should ransoms be paid? Well, this is a complex question. And every complex question has an answer which is simple, obvious, and wrong. The right answer to a complex question is usually also very complex. This particular question has various arguments for and against. I'm going to go to the main ones here. First, the arguments pro. 97% of those who paid the ransom got their data back, which is quite natural. Of course, the cyber criminals are untouchable. If they don't decrypt your files after you pay them, there is nothing you can do. You lost the money, you lost your files. However, this will damage their reputation. If it becomes known that, this ransom organization does not keep its word and does not decrypt your files after you pay, nobody is going to pay. You lost your files, so why was your money as well? That's why usually they are quite professional in this aspect. In fact, many of them have tech support departments that are better than the tech support departments of some large company. So it is very likely, if you pay the ransom, to get your data back. Sometimes you don't have backups. Okay, I'm probably being too polite. The right thing to say that most of the time you don't have backups, or you don't have proper backups. I have seen completely idiotic cases, like one company was backing up its important files in a separate directory on the same drive. And of course, when everything got encrypted on the hard disk, the backups were encrypted too. Another company thought it was very clever. It was backing up to the cloud. Fine. But when the hacker logs into the computer, he has the same access rights as you have. Well, the hackers saw that things were backed up to the cloud and deleted the backups there. The proper thing to do is to back up locally on an external hard disk, which is connected only during the backup, and then is disconnected and preferably kept offsite. But very few companies do that. Another funny thing is that sometimes paying for the decryptor is faster and cheaper than restoring from backups, even if you do have it. This may sound counterintuitive, but I have had such a case myself. One small company was encrypted, hit by ransomware, and they did have backups. They could restore from backups, but the rector said, no, I prefer to pay the ransom because it will be faster and will be cheaper than the salaries of the people who have to restore from backups while not doing the job they are being paid for. Sometimes it's so. In 95% of the cases, according to some statistics I've seen, the only alternative for a company that doesn't have backups and has been hit by ransomware is bankruptcy. Nowadays, companies rely very much on their data, and if their data is gone, so is the company. Okay, those are the arguments for paying ransom. But there are, of course, arguments against that. To begin with, I said 97% got their data back. Okay, but 3% didn't. And essentially, you're gambling. You have already lost your data. You want to also lose the money for the ransom. The chance is not big, but it's 3%. You have to decide. Usually, the decryptors provided by the bad guys are not optimized, they're slow and they're buggy. And this happens so often that I have seen a company, I think in the United Kingdom, whose business model was relying on this. Basically, when a company gets hit and pays the ransom and gets the decryptor from the bad guys, it sends the decryptor to this British company. The company reverse engineers it, gets the decryption keys from it, and writes their own decryptor, which works properly. It's fast, doesn't have bugs, and really decrypts your data. Sometimes the stolen data is published despite that you paid the ransom. Once the data gets out, it's very difficult to stop. And the last argument, it's a moral argument, it's not a technical argument. By paying the ransom, you're basically financing a criminal enterprise. And every dollar that you pay the bad guys, they're using it to attack other people. So you're not making the world better, you're making the world worse. I hope I have convinced you by now that ransomware is a serious problem. It's such a serious problem that politicians have taken notice of it. Okay, there are 3 problems with the politicians. Okay, there are many more problems with politicians, but there are 3 problems that are relevant to the issue at hand. First of all, politicians tend to think like this. Okay, we have a problem. We have to do something about this problem. This is something, therefore we have to do this thing. Now, any reasonable person will tell you that this kind of reasoning is, well, unreasonable. But nevertheless, this is how politicians usually think. The second problem with the politicians is that a politician will never, ever admit that they were wrong. If a particular policy is a miserable failure, the explanation given is always because not enough of it has been done, and never because it was stupid policy, a brain-dead policy that would have never worked in the first place. And the third problem with politicians is that when they come up with an idea to do something, they never stop and think, wait a minute, has anybody done something like this in the past? Did it work back then? Thankfully for myself, and especially for my country, I'm not a politician. So I'm going to ask this question. Has something like this been done before, and did it work better? But the obvious solution I'm talking is, hey, let's make ransomware payments illegal. Ransom payments illegal. You know, the only thing politicians can do is make laws. And somebody who has a hammer, every problem looks to them as a nail. So when presented with the problem of ransomware, the politicians say, okay, let's make payments of ransoms illegal. The simplistic thinking here is if crime doesn't pay, the criminals will stop doing it. Simple, right? Well, it's a bit more complicated in reality. Several countries already considered it. The USA considered it in 2021, but gave up. Australia considered it in 2022, gave up the idea in general, but passed strict reporting requirements. Basically, if a company pays a ransom, it has the obligation to report this to law enforcement. There is no penalty for it, but it has to be reported. The UK considered in 2024, again decided against it. They decided that there are too many different opinions, so they're not ready, more considerations have to be made, and so on. Typical political stuff. Several governments have already imposed such a policy on themselves. Basically, they said government entities are forbidden from paying ransoms. We're not touching private companies, but governments will not pay ransoms. Is it legal? Well, you see, I'm a techie. I usually deal with technical problems and technical solutions. Occasionally, I will make a moral or ethical argument, but here I have to touch the legal side of the subject. And I'm not an expert in this area, so apologies in advance if I say something stupid. But this is what I have been able to find. It is already illegal to provide material support to sanctioned entities. I would say paying $1 million to somebody qualifies for material support, right? I wouldn't mind if somebody pays me $1 million. Many of the ransomware groups in Russia, and nowadays pretty much anything that moves in Russia is already sanctioned. So chances are that those groups are sanctioned too. So if one of the Russian groups ransomware your computers, technically paying ransom to them is already illegal because it qualifies as providing material support. However, this law is not enforced. For instance, paying a ransom for hostage release, human hostage release, although technically illegal, nobody has been ever prosecuted for that. And in fact, in 2015, President Obama issued a policy directive which said no family of an American hostage has ever been prosecuted for paying a ransom for the return of their loved ones. Now, the question here is, if this is so for people, does it apply for important data of the company? We don't know. It hasn't been tested. Nobody has tried to prosecute a company that has paid a ransom to sanctioned entity, but there have been companies that have refrained from paying the ransom based on the reasoning that the group has been sanctioned and it is technically criminal to give them money. Those who are pushing for making ransom payments illegal usually cite a case in Italy that happened in the 70s and 80s. It is quite well known, so I'm going to cover it. I call it the Italian job. There had been a surge of kidnappings for ransom in the 70s and 80s. During this decade, more than 500 people were kidnapped. Basically, a person was kidnapped every week. I'm probably the oldest one of you. I remember this even from our newspapers from communist times. They were talking about hostages being taken in Italy and being held for us. The Italian government, made the ransom payment illegal in 1991, trying to combat this problem because this held over as well. And they were quite serious about it, even went as far as to freeze the bank accounts of the relatives. Basically, if your daughter got kidnapped, your bank accounts are going to be frozen by the government, so that you couldn't pay even if you want. And here's a quotation from an article in the New York Times at that time. From 1969 to 1988, 691 kidnappings were reported, 80 victims were killed, 479 hostages released, the ransom was paid for 372, the rest managed to escape. Okay, as I said, I'm not a politician, so I'm going to ask, did banning ransom payments work? To begin with, it made a lot of people angry. Dozens of people died. 12% of the kidnapped victims died because the ransom was not paid, which is a suboptimal result. Families of the victims paid ransom to the third party, so basically the law was circumvented. The numbers were actually declining already when the law was passed, so it wasn't the law which caused the decline of the problem. The kidnappings continued after the law was passed. So the law did not immediately stop the kidnappings. I'm going to show you some examples for each one. Again, article from the New York Times, Italian ban on paying kidnappers, still object, people were not happy. This is the father of a kidnapped girl, Sylvia Melis. Remember that name? We're going to see it again on the next slide. He said, if there had not been any such law, Sylvia would have been freed at least 4 months earlier. When the life of a hostage is at stake, when the hostage is literally on the grill, putting forward purely legal arguments makes absolutely no sense. And he's right. Remember, I told you to remember the name Sylvia Melis. She was kidnapped, held for 9 months, and miraculously escaped. Turns out she didn't escape, she was released after a local businessman paid more than $800, and her father managed to gather most of the money. So basically, the law was circumvented, ransom was paid, and she was released. This is a chart of the number of kidnappings in Italy, and the red line shows when the law was passed. As you can see, things were already on a decline when the law was passed. So it was certainly not the law that caused the decline. The next chart shows you similar things. Again, the red line when the law was passed. The kidnappings didn't stop. The black dots also exist in this part. And here they are further up. The y-axis shows how many days the hostage was held. And because it was harder to gather and pay the ransom, they were held for longer time. So not only the law didn't stop the kidnappings, to a certain degree, it made the holding of hostages worse, longer. So what stopped the kidnappings? Maybe the law helped. Maybe. That's arguable, but maybe it did. But was it also? Big no. So what helped? To begin with, there were political changes in Italy, and the new government, there was a demand for it to get tougher on crime. As a result, police response became stronger. More kidnappers were apprehended. And the next reason was an economical. Other crimes, like drugs trafficking, became less risky and more profitable. And criminals went where the money was, and the risk wasn't, so they went to drugs. That was the Italian shock. Okay, maybe somebody is thinking, perhaps Italy was a fluke. Maybe it wasn't the typical case. Let's consider some other. Fine. Nigeria. 2022 outlawed ransom payments, introduced death penalty for abductors. 2024, 7,568 abducted, of them 1,056 killed. Does it look like it worked? I don't think so either. The USA, the state of North Carolina, the local government, banned public entities from paying a ransom in 2021. The government of the state of Florida passed a similar ban in 2022. So, are North Carolina and Florida government agencies attacked by ransomware less often than other states? No. In a moment, I'm going to explain why. If such a ban is being passed legally, what could go wrong? Again, I'm not a politician, so I'm going to ask these questions. If payment is banned, this means practically no reporting to law enforcement. Already we have underreported. But if your only way to recover your company's data is to pay a ransom, which means breaking the law, of course you're not going to report that you are about to break the law. So the reporting will go basically to nothing. There will be secondary and tertiary extortion opportunities. Right now, the hackers get a ransom to decrypt your files, often get a ransom for not publishing your data. And if there is such a ban, they'll demand a third ransom for not telling the police that you paid the first two ransoms. The exceptions in some cases could be worse. Again, I think too polite here. In most cases, in the vast majority of cases, deception will be much worse. Remember the other statistics that in 95% of the cases, the only alternative for a company is bankruptcy. So a lot of companies are going to go bankrupt. And here is the explanation why Florida and North Carolina government agencies are not attacked less often than others. Opportunity cost is low. Remember, I told you that the affiliates buy huge lists of vulnerable machines from the access brokers. And they go to the list, they encrypt the computers. If one of the victims doesn't pay, big deal, we're moving to the next one. I don't care in which state it is, I don't care what the laws are. We'll just keep going until we get paid. So it is not really going to impact the attackers. And even if it does, even if their revenue drops, the result will be the ransoms will rise for everyone because they want to make up for the decreased revenue. Multinational companies will be at an advantage compared to small businesses. Let's consider a hypothetical example. Suppose that such a ban is passed in Bulgaria. You have a small Bulgarian company and you get ransomware. What can you do? Nothing. You have to either go bankrupt or break the law. Now, suppose that you're the Microsoft branch in Bulgaria. What can you do? You can tell the Japanese branch of Microsoft to hire a South Korean data recovery company. And the data recovery company basically pays the ransom on your behalf, gets the decryptor, recovers your data that is decrypted, and charges you a data recovery fee, which includes the ransom they paid on your behalf. It is not illegal in South Korea, it is not illegal in Japan, and nobody cares about Bulgaria because it was not done in Bulgaria. So multinationals are going to do that, while small businesses are going to go back. For this whole idea, brain damage idea to work, it will have to be worldwide. There has to be the same law everywhere. This is completely unrealistic. I mean, come on, we cannot agree not to shoot at each other, let alone about such things. More things will go wrong. Again, this is a moral argument, but it essentially punishes the victim. Not only your competitors were encrypted, you have suffered a financial loss, but on the top of that, you're considered now a criminal because you want to recover your data. This is just not right. Laws have to be just. In the case of human kidnappings, usually the payment of ransom was bags of cash. And those are much easier to stop than a cryptocurrency transfer. There was recently, maybe a few years ago, a case in the United States where the kidnappers wanted the ransom for a kidnapped person to be paid in uncut diamonds that had to be delivered at a particular place, put in a drone, and then the drone flew away. And nevertheless, the police managed to catch them. So physical payments are easier to trace, but cryptocurrencies transfers not so much. some critical organizations will have to be allowed to pay. If your nuclear power plant's computers got ransomware, or if your cancer hospital got ransomware and human lives are at stake, nobody cares about what politicians think. You have to be able to recover as fast as possible. And if paying the ransom is the only solution, you will have to be allowed to do that. The UK government even thought about giving licenses for paying the ransom. Basically, you're going to ban ransom payments, but if some organizations consider mission critical, we're going to issue them a license. Okay, you're allowed to circumvent this law. Not only this, but cyber criminals will learn this quite quickly, and they will start attacking such organizations with priority, because they will know that then it is guaranteed that we're going to get the ransom. Advance will be ignored by the companies because it is better to risk getting caught and paying a fine for breaking the law than your whole company going back. There's a problem with the animation here. I'm sure there was one more one, but I cannot.
Сигурно се повинно завършено. Изчакай го малко. Изчакай го малко.
Whatever. Right. Some criminals will keep hacking and stealing the data to resell even if they don't get arrested. In fact, even now, there are groups that when they attack a computer, they don't bother encrypting the data. They just steal the data. First, they demand a ransom for not publishing it. And if you don't pay, they steal the data of other hackers. So they get paid in any case. And as we saw from the previous examples, this idea hasn't worked in the past, and there is no reason to think that it will work in the future. It's a bad idea. Okay, some of you are probably thinking, you are very good at criticizing other people's ideas. So can you tell us what should be done? Remember, this is a complex problem. All the obvious solutions that you can think of are most likely wrong. And I can only offer complex things that might work to a certain degree, but are not guaranteed to solve the problem. Let us consider one of the alternatives. I'm not going to endorse it, but I have to consider that has been thought of in the past. There are nowadays companies that provide so-called cyber insurance. Just like you can insure your house against fire, in case it burns down, the company pays you a certain amount of money. You can insure your company's computers against cyber attacks. This doesn't mean that the cyber attacks will stop, but basically, if they succeed, the company is going to pay you a certain amount of money to recover the cost. The idea behind this is because insurance companies, of course, do not want to pay. They will take measures to ensure that your security policy is such that breach or security incident is unlikely to happen. So that you pay them the premiums, but they don't pay you anything in exchange. Unfortunately, this doesn't work. To begin with, the amount of money that these insurance companies pay is very often not enough. Very often not enough to cover a ransom, let alone the full cost of a ransomware. Furthermore, remember I told you ransomware is the last step. Before that, the hackers have been through your data, they have examined it, they have seen that you have cyber insurance, and they have increased the ransom because they know that part of it is going to come from your insurance policy. And this is precisely what happens. It results in higher ransom demand from the victims. Of course, companies and governments should be free to adopt no ransom payments policy. I have myself encouraged all companies that have been hit by a ransomware not to pay the ransom. This is the morally right thing to do. What I'm saying here is that this should be a voluntary policy. At the end, the business decision has to be made by the company. Nobody else has the right to make it for them, certainly not governments. Sometimes, alas, paying the ransom is what makes the most business sense for the company. Post-reporting of ransomware attacks is a good idea in principle. This is what Australia is doing right now. It is a good idea because it will let us get a better view of the big picture, but a better view of how bad the problem really is. But I'm saying this reporting should preserve the anonymity of the victims. Currently, this is not so. Those American companies that are public, basically that have stocks on the stock market, have a requirement to report cyber incidents in their quarterly reports. And there are already banks, which are not the companies themselves, but the banks are lobbying to remove this requirement because it damages the reputation of the company. So I think that this reporting should be anonymous. We need the data, we need to know how bad the problem is, but we don't need to publicly share these companies. And provided that this is not just used as a stepping stone for total ban of ransomware payments. You know, the both-frog approach when something is for real, something is mandatory, and then suddenly what you didn't want to happen happens. There are more things that need doing. None of them are easy. We should incentivize better security. Just like now, companies have financial audits to make sure that their finances are in order. And these audits are done by independent third parties. Similarly, independent third parties should audit the company's security. And if the conclusion is that this company has very good security, there should be some tax breaks for the company in order to incentivize that. There should be a better regulation of cryptocurrency transfer. Any libertarian people among the public are people probably think, although this should be completely private and so on. Well, there is no reason to be able to transfer 100,000 US dollars to ISIS to support them. There shouldn't be an easy way to transfer $1 million to some hacking group in Russia either. There should be the same kind of controls that we have in banks. This is an arguable proposal. I know that many people will disagree with me here. There should be government-to-government negotiations about this. Let me give you an example. Shortly before the war in Ukraine, American law enforcement provided information to the Russian government about the identities of hackers on the so-called RL group. It was a ransomware. But maybe first I have to explain why there are so many ransomware groups in Russia. There's a very good reason for that. And the reason for it is grounded in the Russian constitution. The Russian constitution explicitly forbids the extradition of Russian citizens. So if you are a cyber criminal in Russia, you don't hurt anybody in Russia. You don't conduct any kind of operation against them, but you conduct operations against other countries. The other countries might figure out who you are, but they cannot extradite you. Nevertheless, as a result of this cooperation, the bad guys from RL were arrested by the Russian authorities. Not extradited, of course, but arrested. However, when the war in Ukraine happened, all cooperation stopped. And a few days ago, the guys were released. They were sentenced to time serving. Basically, during the investigation, they were in jail, and this was considered they have done their time. No reason to punish them anymore. This is all. I know that everybody hates Russia, but even if a government is politically unfriendly, if you don't like them, there is no reason not to cooperate on such basic things like cybercrime. and it requires international cooperation because it's an international crime. You can attack people in a completely different country, and we need such a cooperation with all governments. The next one is a no-brainer. Believe it or not, in many places, ransomware payments are tax deductible. The thinking is, it's basically a financial loss. But if you lost money, this is deducted from your taxes. This is removed from your profits, and therefore you pay less taxes. Well, maybe you shouldn't do like this. You shouldn't get a tax break just because you got lost. If you have to sanction somebody, sanction the cryptocurrency exchanges that are hosting criminal wallets. There are cryptocurrency exchanges that even specialize in this kind of service. But there was one called BTCE or something like that. It was based in Cyprus. Doesn't exist anymore, but a large part of ransoms were laundered through it. So sanction those who help the criminals, not the victims who pay the ransom. And finally, there should be better actions from the governments to disrupt ransomware attacks. This sounds like a wild goose chase theory, but nowadays, almost all governments have very strong cyber capabilities, and they are perfectly capable of disrupting criminal ransomware attacks. Just a few examples. Canadian Spain agency targeted foreign hackers to impose costs on cybercrime. Department of Justice says 2.3 million cryptocurrency paid as ransom. Basically, the victim paid the ransom, but the government intervened in the cryptocurrency exchange and seized the stuff before the attackers were able to collect. The government turns tables on this same evil gang. Basically, they invaded their websites, they stole their private data, internal chats, and so on. This is a good thing. We have to see more of this. Governments are perfectly capable of doing this. Instead of passing stupid laws, do this. Well, thank you for your patience. That was all. I hope you are not very bored. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to ask them. If you prefer, ask them in Bulgarian, I will repeat everything.
Аз не мисля, че е много лесно да се зададат въпроси. Тази тема за мен е по-скоро дискусионна и е въпрос на размисъл. Аз сама за себе си дори не бих могла на този етап да взема каквато и да е позиция за или против. Но действително между практиката какво ни се иска от гледна точка на частно лице, аз бих потвърдила така за себе си, че бих искала да имам избор. Може би нали, политиката да се ограничат по някакъв начин големите корпорации, въпреки че ми е много чудно как може големи организации да нямат направени системи, бекъпи, които да работят и така нататък, т.е. да си позволили да бъдат зависими от ransomware. Т.е. готови се да дадат огромно количество пари, а в същото време не са готови предварително да ги инвестират в превенция.
Okay, hold on. So if I understood correctly, the boss agrees that this is a complex question. He says that as a private person should like to have the choice, so to be able to choose whether to pay the ransom imposed by the law. That maybe stricter measures should be taken against the large companies. And she really cannot understand how really large companies fall victim to ransomware, how come they don't have good security, and how they can afford to pay money for ransoms, but not pay money to invest in their cybersecurity. Well, the thing is, when your machines are already infected, you have a problem in front of your eyes. You either pay the ransom or you're gone. Well, if your computer incident response director comes to you and tells you I want 1 more million investment to be able to beef up our security, you're probably going to say, yes, but we have to pay that many money to the marketing because they bring profits immediately. Remind me again the next month. And this is what happens. Because investment in security is seen as an expense. It's not seen as an investment because it doesn't have immediate impact. A friend of mine from Finland, Mikko Hipanen, said once, rarely is anybody thanked for preventing a catastrophe that didn't happen. And this is what happened to ransomware. When the catastrophe happens, it is obvious. When you are asking for something to prevent the catastrophe that hasn't happened yet, the director is likely to say no, because every company has a limited amount of money. It's not like they have some stash of money they can take from there and give that to you. They have to take it from some other department. They have to decide which department needs it the most. And they prefer a department that immediately brings money to the company instead of one that promises that maybe I will make it so that you don't lose money in the future. That's what happens. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, this was not a question. This was like a small discussion. Okay, thanks everybody. If someone wants to ask something, you can write it in the chat. Also,
We'll try to make the lecture publicly available, but for now I don't know exactly how it's going.
okay, in that case, maybe we are ready to close this workshop for today. Thank you for your attention and for being here. And we should have a nice rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Somebody tried to say something.
Maybe he's. Mr. Chichakov, we are not hearing you. We are not able to hear or not. Now it's okay.
No, it's not. Să nu închide microfonul.
Имайте предвид, че сте сами отнали и не ви чуваме.
Should be okay now.
Well, thank you for the interesting lecture. I'm thinking of some aspects. If it is legalized, is it possible to have some fake ransom banks?
Of course, there are opportunities for fraud everywhere. But I'm really not an expert in financial crimes, so I don't really know how it can be done, but you're probably right, yes. There will be abuse of such law in
Abuses, yes.
ways.
Thanks.
I think it's obvious.
Yeah.
They will simulate ransom attack, simulate payments, get it back.
Well, they have to prove them now, there's not a process, there will be financial audit and so on. But there are totally ways around that. They can encrypt their computers on purpose and so on. That's why we need better way to trace cryptocurrency payments.
Yes.
See whether
Yeah.
the wallets that receive the payment is not owned by the director of the company. Or
Yes,
by the-
yeah.
Okay, so maybe we are now ready to close the meeting. Thank you once again, and have a nice day to all of you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
And bye.
Bye.
Изключение камера 30.
Интересно цяло, да?
Благодаря.